Welcome everyone. My name is Wayne Davis. I'm the chair of the board of the Lexington Arts and Crafts Society, which we know as LexArt. And we're just delighted to have all of you join us. This is our monthly series, LexArt Inspires, the third Thursday of each month. It's a series of conversations that we started in July in the sort of the first big dip of the pandemic. We wanted to just be talking with each other and broadening our community to talk about the topics of inspiration, perception, and creativity. Where does it come from? How do people work with it? And one of the exciting things for us at LexArt is that we've been trying to use this particular venue to push our own boundaries. LexArt is primarily around supporting the visual arts. We're a community arts center located in the center of Lexington. But the more that we talked about this topic, the more we realized that really the topics of creativity, perception, and so forth really cross all sorts of different artistic mediums. And so we're absolutely delighted to be able to push our own boundaries here with this evening's program, which we're calling Crossing Boundaries, Creative Collaboration Through Dance. Now, I don't know, LexArt's been around 85 years, so I'm not going to say that this is absolutely, excuse me, the first thing that we've done with dance, but it's certainly the first thing that we've done in many years. And so we are delighted to be hosting this and delighted to be having you join us. Tonight's program, we are presenting in collaboration with Ballet Russe Arts Initiative, and you'll be hearing a little bit more about Ballet Russe Arts Initiative a little bit later on this evening. Our two guests, as you know, are Rebecca Rice and Anna Winestein. Rebecca is an award-winning choreographer. She's a respected teacher at Cushing Academy, and where she's the director of director of dance, and she's the artistic director of her own dance company, Rebecca Rice Dance. Her work has been presented literally around the world, US, France, Scotland, and in Kazakhstan, plenty of places around here in the Boston area. And she's been a cultural envoy for the US State Department. She's created works for the Boston Ballet 2 Company, Jacob's Pillow, Boston Celebrity Series, and worked with the Boston Symphony. As we'll hear a little bit later, she was born into a family of dancers, and she spent her early years training and performing with her grandmother, Marion Rice, who was a student of Ted Shawn and a practitioner of Dennis Shawn dance, which is also something that we'll hear about. Rebecca's been called one of Boston's esteemed dance makers by Gus Solomon, a critic in New York City. And our second guest is Anna Winestein, who's an arts entrepreneur whom I've had the pleasure of meeting about a year ago. And we started cooking with all sorts of ideas, and it's been a real thrill, personal thrill for me to be working with her. In addition to being an arts entrepreneur, she's a nonprofit leader, cultural historian, curator, a reformed economist, though one would perhaps say recovering economist, and a maker. She's a co-founder and executive director of the Ballet Russe Arts Initiative, and she's previously served as the creative director of the Hermitage Museum Foundation.
I wish I was the creative decorator.
Creative decorator, yes. Particularly for the Hermitage, right?
Yeah, exactly, that's what I'm saying.
So Rebecca and Anna have worked together over the past decade, a bunch of different projects, and that's what we're going to hear about tonight. So let me turn the program over to them. The last thing I do want to say just before doing that is sometimes in these programs, we encourage you to put things in the chat as we're going along. Tonight, we're going to do it a little bit differently. We'll ask you not to put things in the chat while our guests are speaking. When we get to the end of the program and the Q&A, then actually we will ask you to pop things into the chat so we know who has questions. But for now, we encourage you just to sit back, listen, and enjoy. Our guests will speak for a little bit. We'll have a little bit of Q&A in the middle, and then they'll resume talking, and then a more extended Q&A at the end. So, Anna?
Thanks very much, Wayne. It's been a really fun process to prepare this presentation with you and for all of you. And we're going to be sort of the way we've always worked on over the years with Rebecca. It's sort of always a back and forth. It's a dance. I think we'll need Rebecca to start the slideshow, and then I'll start speaking, and then we're going to pass the baton back and forth with the slideshow in the background. So Rebecca, do you want to screen share? Wonderful. All right. Well, so the first time I met Rebecca was I think actually the first time we connected was by phone in very early 2009. So it's been over a decade, and it was in the context of a project that my colleague Peter Rand and I were doing at the time. We were putting on a citywide festival around Boston and even in the surrounding area, focused on the centenary of the Ballet Russe, the historic company, Russian dance and opera company, actually, that came to Paris and premiered in 1909. And we had really recruited for this project numerous organizations around Boston, including Boston Ballet, the Museum of Fine Arts, New England Conservatory, and very importantly, and also Boston University, where we did a big conference. But most relevantly to our work together with Rebecca, we had convinced the Pops to present a program celebrating the Ballet Russe and exploring their musical legacy during our May festival that year. And so in the conversation with Keith Lockhart, Rebecca, do you want to maybe advance to the next slide?
Yeah.
So in the conversation with Keith Lockhart, one of the things that we pitched was we had access to a very creative stage production of Stravinsky's The Firebird, which actually we showed an excerpt of, and the Pops played to, so that they kind of synchronously performed the music accompanying that stage performance. But Keith very much wanted live dance performance as well. And so they ended up doing something quite unprecedented, which is that they took out several rows of tables in the front of the hall for the Pops, and they made a small stage. And the idea was to have a local dance maker, create new choreography. And it wasn't, although some other aspects of the Ballet Russe 2009 festival were really kind of very strictly historically focused on the original Ballet Russe company. In this case, it was a little bit more flexible in that Keith really prioritized music that that could be sort of pulled into a medley, so a few small pieces, and that would be suited to a dance that could fit on this relatively small stage. I mean, it was a very small surface, but he wanted, not just one dancer, he wanted multiple dancers. And so, with all those restrictions, it's such a challenging task. We really had to think hard about who in the area would really be capable of working under those limitations. And on top of that, we didn't have very much time. I mean, all sort of the Pops had come on board at the end of 2008, but it took a while to figure out what we were doing. And so, I think, Rebecca, I think we reached out to you in like January, but you really only got going in something like February, and you had 3 months to put on this project. So do you want to take over talking now about how that proceeded?
Yes, talking to Anna on the phone, I thought she was an accomplished scholar, but I thought she was a lot older than she is.
Just coming out of it.
And so I got a lot of ideas from her in terms of music, because the reality is that we needed to find music that was focusing on areas that Diaghilev inspired, or they had worked with Diaghilev. So I chose Stravinsky and Prokofiev and Khachaturian. And I came up with a medley of like a playlist of sorts of 5 pieces. And of course, it took me a long time to kind of research and go over this and find something that I was inspired to choreograph to as well. Ran it by Keith Lockhart, and much to my delight, he thought it was great. So um, the piece is in 5 movements. It's about 25 minutes long. And this is the first movement. These are beautiful photographs by Matt Karras, actually, from New York City. And this is the first movement. The music is by Stravinsky. It's Chant de Rossignol. And the music is very dissonant. And I put archaic movement into it and had it kind of very austere lines. It was very much inspired by the movement for the music, for sure. I'm bringing this slide up right away because this is our core. This is my company I worked with, as well as our costume designer, Amanda Mujica. And she did such a fabulous job on these costumes. Anna is going to talk a little bit about the inspiration for these costumes, which is, of course, the ballet russe.
Well, so basically what Amanda is clearly influenced by in these designs was the sort of Greek, sort of geometric style costumes that Leon Bakst, the legendary artist and fashion designer, created. Particularly, he did these productions, Narcisse in 1911 and Daphnis and Chloe, which had music by Debussy in 1912. And these costumes, I think, were very much drawing on that.
So this is the first section. You can see Keith in the back. These are live shots of the performance. This is the second movement, and it's performed by Adrina DeVitri, who's one of my dancers, and she's now a dentist on Commonwealth Avenue in Boston, also dancing, has 2 children now. And I'm going to show you an excerpt of this piece so you can get an idea of what it was like. And here we go. This is Polka from the Age of Gold by Prokofiev. I'm sorry, Shostakovich, got that wrong. That was the next section is from Prokofiev, March from the Love of Oranges. And this is Sarah Knight who did this solo. And it's kind of it's a pompous military movement style. It was slapstick humor, and the music is quite unique. So I loved choreographing to that. This next one is the Saber Dance by Khachatorian. And this is, if anybody knows this dance, it is 5 million times in miles an hour. It's very, very quick. And I wanted to actually show you a little bit about little bit of this piece. And then this moves into the last section, which is very rhapsodic and very romantic. And it's the Waltz in Jazz, Suite 2 by Khachatorian. And this brings up my Denishan influence, which Wayne talked about a little bit in the beginning, which is, you know, at the turn of the century, it was kind of Art Nouveau and very kind of a blend of ballet and modern, but the modern was very organic. So this is ballet moves that actually are off center and on the floor, and it's unique. So I'm going to show you both a section of the Saber dance and the whole last movement. This is another incredible photograph by Matt Karras. And here we go. And this is going into the last movement. Um, I'm always embarrassed when I have my picture um, on me when I'm watching a dance because I don't know, I tried really hard to be still. So Anna, we're into
But
the next one. Yeah.
yeah, but don't you want to pull up the image? We were going to talk with the image.
Yes. Hold on.
So, the project that you saw took place in May of 2009, and what had happened was that Peter Rand, my colleague, and I, we'd originally really been focused on carrying out the citywide project, but we soon we understood that we had developed all these great relationships, and we really wanted to kind of continue the spirit of the festival in the way that it brought organizations together and explored Russian culture and dance culture and many other art forms. And so we had actually decided to turn that into an ongoing arts organization just a couple months before the festival actually took place. And we came up with this name, Belarus Cultural Partnership, which is how we were known at the time. And we pivoted from originally the festival was really more focused on kind of on Russia and Russian cultural history and the connection with the US, and then we broadened to really wanting to kind of include the entire former Soviet region into that. And as you'll see later on in our presentation, just 2 years later, Rebecca and I did this project in Kazakhstan that you'll hear more about a little bit later on. We're taking some of these projects out of chronological order because other themes kind of intertwine differently. Um, and so what happened was we sort of pivoted to, rather than doing like a single once a year kind of series of programs, ongoing events, concerts, film screenings, and so on and so forth. We started actually a concert series at the Algonquin Club of Boston on Commonwealth Avenue, which is very beautiful and very historic. And that series, concert series, went on for about 5 years. And we also began this annual sort of showcase event, where we tried to bring, in the spirit of the Belarus, different art forms together. And yes, it was a fundraiser, but really it was also a way to kind of highlight some of the creative people where we were working with at the time. And so we'd have some, musical performers, some singers. And for the very first gala, Rebecca, do you want to advance the slide?
Sure.
For the first such gala that we did at the Algonquin Club, which is called the Salome Ball, I thought it was just absolutely essential to have to get Rebecca involved and have some dance present. And the idea of this project was, in 1913, the Ballet Russe had premiered a new production called The Tragedy of Salome, and the music was by Florence Schmidt. And so the kind of the what I came to Rebecca with is, I wanted her to interpret Salome to Schmidt's music, well, an excerpt from it at least. And we had it was at the Symphony Hall, we'd had this small stage, but at the Algonquin Club, we were in a way even more constrained because we had the space where the event was happening, and we had to have seating for people. And so Rebecca, created a solo dance for Adrina, whom you saw in the previous, in the Russe suite. She created a piece for Adrina interpreting her idea of Salome and really drawing on modern dance ideas for that. So Rebecca, floor is yours.
Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. Adrina is just really lovely to work with, and she is also very dramatic. So I'm going to show you a little excerpt of the opening of it, not the whole thing, just so you can get a sense of the club and how this whole piece evolved. I
And
also
just for context, this is photos from the rehearsal studio where Adrina was working with this scarf.
Right, this is from Green Street Studios in Cambridge, where we worked. And this scarf, incidentally, is a Denishan scarf that is from a piece called Delasho that my grandmother learned from Rue Saint Denis, and we performed for years. So I decided to use a scarf because she needed to be very seductive in her dance in order to get people to agree to cut John the Baptist's head off, which is So
And the plate that Adrina is dancing with is actually one of my chargers that I was using at home when we needed a gold looking,
like
very
I got,
light, easy to grip
yeah.
plate. So that's what we ended up working with.
And so here's a picture of the actual performance. You can see how close the people are, and they're all very fancily dressed, and their expressions are fascinating. And here's just an opening excerpt I will show, since the piece is about 6 minutes long, and it shows the beginning of her dancing very kind of seductively, and at the end realizing the tragic horror of what happened. There we go. We don't have time to show the rest of it, but
But I should just mention, it's interesting, this reminded me, I had mentioned how Amanda was influenced by Bach's Fort Roos suite. Another element that was always present in Bach's designs was these kind of swirling, kind of flowing fabrics that accentuated the movement. And that was actually something that Mikhail Fokin, the first choreographer of the Ballet Russe, kind of employed. So the costumes were also designed with components that would extend the movement in a very similar way. And in fact, Fokin had been influenced by Isadora Duncan, so sort of comes back all a little bit to a modern dance route. Do we want to, Wayne, do we want to take just a pause as we planned now to take a few questions and then proceed with the other pieces?
Sure, yes.
If so, Rebecca, do you want to stop sharing briefly?
sure.
So yes, we thought it might be at this point to see if anyone has any questions. You can either raise your hand using the function at the bottom. We'll see if we get anyone, or if not, you can just unmute yourself perhaps and pop in. Anyone have anything? Okay.
Anne was messaging, is there any chance of seeing more of Dancing from the Pop space? So Anne, we will be showing footage of other productions a little bit later. So, and the other thing is that what we plan to do is after this event is over, all of you will get an email follow-up with links to complete production videos for 3 of the pieces from tonight. So early next week, you'll get a link to watch the whole of those particular pieces.
I have a question for Rebecca.
Yes, hi.
Hi, how are you? It's Amy.
Hi, Amy. How are you? One of my friends from Dana Hall School.
Yes. I was wondering, I was very fortunate that I you choreographed with me, and I was one of your dancers many moons ago. And I'm wondering, over the extent of your career, how do you feel like your choreography style has shifted from when we worked together to like the present day to this particular piece or particular set of pieces?
Well, I had the opportunity to teach at the Bossa Ballet School for 17 years. Actually, at the same time, I was teaching you at Dana Hall. But working with ballet dancers brought up my technique from Denishon, which is, you know, I learned a lot of ballet vocabulary, but I also learned a lot of modern vocabulary when I studied in New York and did my degrees. So, you know, my forte, I think, is blending both of them. And I think at Dana Hall, we worked a little more in the modern genre, and with my pieces with these dancers who are mostly ballet trained dancers, I incorporated modern with them, so that was fun for me to do. But Amy, you came with ballet training too, so I use what
I did.
I use what I have, you know. And
Well, and then of course, improv is such a big part of what you do, and you'll be talking about that later, Rebecca.
yeah, and we did a lot of improv at Dana Hall, didn't we?
We did. I mean, from what I could see, the styles seem like your choreography almost seemed more like joyful and lighter, a little more playful. So yeah, it's I love it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Does anyone have
I
any?
think, yeah, one more question probably, and then we should get back to the talk.
Sure. Was there, did anyone have something? I actually had one quick question. I hope it'll be a quick answer. And it's along these same lines about this mixing of the modern with classical. Do you get much resistance either from the dancers or from the audiences when you're you know, mixing these things? For example, in that very first piece, there was a movement that I may be misrepresenting this, but it looked almost like a small jitterbug movement where they crouched and lifted their arms a little bit, which in the context of the music and the costumes, I just thought was wild and wonderful. But you know, how do people react to that? Do they have trouble with it, or do they embrace it?
Well, starting at the Boston Ballet, it took me probably 7 or 8 years for people to take me seriously, because I was a modern dancer coming in to their territory, which is very traditional, and also I was teaching choreography. So teaching choreography has to do with having the ballet dancers do improv. And improv is a scary, frightening thing when you've spent your life in a studio basically being told what to do. You know, you do what you're learning in a linear fashion. So modern is a little bit more, it's a lot more creative from my point of view. Even the technique is, but the ballet has all the training and the virtuosity that I think is very important as well. I just think that people have a hard time doing the ballet if they haven't had the training and they're scared of it. So yeah, you have resistance on both sides for sure.
Well, I mean, I think sometimes the dancers could resist. Like one of the reasons that, as we'll talk about, you know, I suggested that Rebecca come to Kazakhstan for the project we ended up doing there, was that I saw in the dancers there who were trained very heavily in ballet, at the same time, a much greater openness to Rebecca's kind of movement than what I'd seen in Russia. So, you know, some dancers have all that balletic rigor, but they also have the kind of flexibility and the musicality. Not all dancers are equally musical, and I think Rebecca is very musical. She cares a lot about the music, and in fact, you know, for a lot of the projects she spent a lot of time researching the music, and we spent a lot of time arguing about the selection of the music, because I had certain art historical parameters that I wanted to sort of push for, and then she had certain expressive dance parameters, and not all dancers are able to adapt to that music. So if it goes outside of that familiar kind of balletic repertoire, they have trouble with it. But the Kazakh dancers, you'll see later, had no trouble with it at all. So that can be an issue.
Great. Good.
So
Let's continue.
Okay, so we
pull
go.
up the next image, yeah, the Pem Fabergé.
Fabergé.
So, so I'm actually, as a scholar, as an art historian, my specialty is Russian visual and theater culture of the 19th and 20th centuries. And in fact, I used to consult for Sotheby's in London. And while there, I got to know Geza von Habsburg, who's one of the top Fabergé specialists in the world. And so it was a very sort of interesting confluence of things when a show that that Geza had curated and helped assemble the artifacts for actually ended up coming to the Peabody Essex Museum. And at the same time, I was also, developing some projects and collaborations with the Peabody Essex. And so they asked me to help them put together a performance for the opening of this Fabergé exhibition in 2013 that would really somehow bring the ideas and the beauty and the preciousness of the objects in the galleries into the lobby of the museum where the kind of celebrations and the event itself was taking place. And so this was another occasion where I, recruited Rebecca, and she did her magic.
This is Marcus Romeo. I asked Miko Nissinen, who's the artistic director of the Boston Ballet, if I could, well, I was there for 17 years and then I left. So in order to use the dancers, I have to ask permission. So let me, and Marcus.
So you borrowed Marcus.
I borrowed Marcus. And he really wanted, I was able to work with BB2 a lot because he wanted them to learn modern training, which helps them in their careers. So of course, Marcus, I was able to work with him. Anyway, he's just lovely and just sweetheart. But you can see when we show you this piece, I'm not going to play the music because the sound quality is awful, but I will have it as a link for you all to see because I will splice the two beautiful Rachmaninoff pieces that I used in there, so you'll hear the beautiful music. And it's from Rachmaninoff's Preludes. One is the Prelude in F minor by Opus 32, and the second is Prelude in D, Opus 23. And the first one is very robust and very full of space and powerful. And the second section is very intricate and focusing on the preciousness of the Fabergé eggs. But I named the piece Gem, so that has the same connotation. So I'm going to show you, oh, here we go. We have a little social hour. This is myself and Marcus and Anna. And this is some of the donors and the folks.
And Geza and his wife, there's the director of the Peabody Essex Museum is on the right, and then in from there is Geza's wife and Geza himself, who are very involved with the project. And
then this is a section, this is the piece. I think the volume's off.
Yeah, the volume's off, good.
I'm just going to show you a little section of it, but you can get an idea of how upright he is. I'm just talking technicality now. He had a hard time working his torso, and the torso work is from the modern work, which is Martha Graham. Of course, she created and designed the contraction, which is the real beginning of modern dance in America, which started around the 1920s. Martha Graham was a student of Ted, Sean, and St. Dennis, as my grandmother was. She went off and found her own voice. And modern dance is about emotion, it's about feeling, it's about making movement an art form that has to come from inside and not from outside. And of course, they were rebelling against ballet, which was superficial in their view. And here you see a lot of the vocabulary, the piqué turns and the tours jetés that aren't really in the modern training that you get. But when you combine the two, there's a lovely synergy that I find. So I had a lot of fun working with him. And then I'm going to move into more of the soft section that I use this idea of the middle of the palm to show the subtlety and the nuance of and the love of a beautiful object, piece of something that's precious and special to someone.
Well, Fabergé was particularly known for just the refinement of the jewel work kind of incrustations, the enamels, the Fabergé enamels, those kind of beautifully intricate sort of glowing surfaces. In fact, he was even awarded prizes at the 1900 World's Fair in Paris and other ones because it was sort of just a unique technique and mastery. So I think Rebecca captured that very well. And I should say it's really fun in that particular video that you can see the dance from above, which allows you to really see the shapes that Rebecca's forming, because sometimes when you look at dance straight on, you don't really get that full sense. So when I'm like in the ballet world and in ballet theater, I love to be up on the second balcony or even sometimes higher, so I can really see dances from above it at this angle rather than just straight on. And we're back in the same lobby of the Peabody Essex Museum, but different side of it this time for the next project, which was the Peabody Essex Museum's Creative Future Gala, for which we came up with a concept, much more abstract idea for a performance that Rebecca set, and she'll tell you about shortly. That was part of the event, and really was focused on innovation and experimentation. And so she used a lot of improv in this production, and she'll explain to you what improv in this world means.
Yes, improvisation is basically moving, not thinking before you make the movement, so that you actually go with the flow. And to connect with it takes a while to become confident in that area. And we use a lot of that in dance education as well as in creating new choreography. This is a section of us in rehearsal. And this is, again, Adrina, and there's a wonderful dancer, Whitney Cover, who's now in Germany, and Mariah Steele, who teaches at University of Rochester. Here they are, dancing in rehearsal.
But if I understand correctly, Rebecca, your kind of improv work with them here was you had them experimenting in the studio, and then in the dance itself at Peabody Essex Museum, they weren't like completely on the fly improvising it, but
No.
they had a structure, but they were improvising within that structure, right?
Oh, of course, yes. It is definitely, I use improv to come up with movement material. And then let's say if the dance is 12 minutes long, I might have 50 seconds that they'd be improvising, but they'd have a place and space to go. And the movement design would be linear or curvilinear. I'd give them, like you said, parameters. This is a section which you'll be able to see them improvising in the beginning. And then the second section is all choreographed. And I have to say the music I used was Steve Wright, Andrew Parker, and Trent Mueller. And this is a piece by Andrew Parker, who's a contemporary composer in Maine. But they're all improvising here. Now, Drina has studied with me since she was 10. She's a project of the professional track Boston Ballet School. She's been Clara, but she's had modern with me, so she can do everything. So that's rehearsal footage. The piece about 12 minutes long, and the lighting, I mean, it was a beautiful, the lighting design was just gorgeous. Oops, don't want to go back. So I think I missed a slide, Anna.
Yeah, I think you missed the one in the yurt.
I can back up though. Yes, I can.
Yeah.
There we go.
So, so this is a fun photo. This is taken in Kazakhstan inside a Kazakh tent called a yurt, and the gentleman on the left was at the time the public affairs officer for the U.S. State Department in Kazakhstan, and he and I had gotten to know each other in Moscow when he was cultural affairs officer there. And he had been really helpful when I was originally doing the Belarus 2009 festival. And he, from Moscow, was then posted to Astana. And when he got there, he is himself a trained pianist. And actually now he's on the board of Belarus. He's retired from the State Department. But anyway, he got to Kazakhstan and he found a very interesting and sort of musical and performance culture there, and he started telling me about it and basically invited me to come and visit and see for myself what was going on there creatively. And he was, having spent quite a lot of time in the kind of Russian universe of things, he was struck by how open that society was and how open its creatives were. And so that's why he encouraged me to go visit. And so I initially, back in 2010, I went to Kazakhstan and checked it out and explored some of the interesting things going on. And so, while there, sort of Jeff and I cooked up this idea of, bringing an American choreographer to Kazakhstan to work with the dancers. And I got to know Gulnara Adamova, who is the founder of Samuruk Dance, and she's the woman second in front on the left next to Jeff, between Jeff and Rebecca, actually. And I was struck by her dancers and the kind of very open and entrepreneurial attitude that I found generally in Kazakhstan and in her company in particular. This wasn't this typical kind of post-Soviet hierarchical sort of structure. And so, I came back and told Rebecca about, my impressions, and we started working with Jeff on putting the project together to have Rebecca come to Kazakhstan and to work with Samuruk Dance Theater and stage a performance, but also teach them, some of her sort of techniques and strategies. And then also Rebecca and I ended up going out and doing some kind of community outreach and even, lectures and things, which we'll cover later. But what ended up happening was that Rebecca and I went to Kazakhstan, to Almaty, which is the historic capital of Kazakhstan. Astana is now the political capital, and spent 3 weeks there. And we lived together, and we basically, went from our apartment to the studio. She taught class, and I was constantly having to translate for her because I'm a Russian speaker, and the Kazakhs mostly speak Russian rather than Kazakh. So it was a very interesting experience because I, watched the entire process of her creating this dance in the studio, and she was able to communicate with the dancers sometimes through simply the language of movement, but very often, like, it was all coming through me, and I had them going on both sides of me, and it was a very interesting experience. And I actually have ballet and dance training myself, so sometimes I would take the class with the Samuruk dancers as well. So I'll turn the floor over to Rebecca to tell you a little bit about how the ideas that informed this piece and how she worked on it with the dancers.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for inviting me over there and for all the work you've had me do. It's just really special to work with you. It was incredible being in the studio with this amazing group of dancers and to have Anna there to help me because I didn't understand a stitch of Russian. And of course, they were all Russian. How do you create a dance without understanding the language? Well, we did it. And it's amazing how the dancers can kind of get a sense of you through movement, and so many things I didn't even have to explain, and I just did it, and it's fun. It was really a magical time. This is their studio here. This is just a little bit of a class. I don't know if I'll show you the whole thing, but just
there I am in in the background. I can see myself in the background there.
But you can see all that there's so many dancers there, and they have such beautiful training because they're, we're under Russia, state of Russia, so Moscow has Vaganova, one of the top ballet teachers in the world.
Well, I would say that these guys have all been trained in the post-Soviet times, but their teachers would have been trained in Moscow and Petersburg.
Oh, yeah, right, absolutely.
And Vaganova is actually in St. Petersburg.
But the influence of the dance technique that they have is quite phenomenal. But as Anna said, they didn't have the same kind of a modern feel. So there we go. So this is me. They're doing a run through, and you'll see some of that a little later. This is giving you an idea of how I put it together, and very briefly, it's only a minute, but I just started with playing with phrases and getting to know the dancers, because I really get inspired by the energy and the personalities of the dancers. I wasn't really sure what I was even going to say in the piece. Here I am playing around with different music. I'm not sure what piece of music I was going to use. And after about a week of teaching and then going over phrases and playing with music, I started to put the piece together. You can see this is another piece of music I'm playing with. I ended up using a piece by Steve Wright called 3 Movements. And he's an avant-garde minimalist composer, very well known.
And I was very excited about the fact that Rebecca was highlighting these American minimalist composers who have influenced a lot of actually post-Soviet composers, influenced and inspired a lot of people over there.
Yeah. 6, 7, 8, and hard, and hard. Da 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 yeah da 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 yeah da da yeah. So I was playing the canon with the movement phrases. Da da yeah da 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 yeah da 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 yeah da 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 yeah da 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 yeah da da da. So I chose this piece of music because it had variances of qualities and energy, and I wanted to do a piece that represented the people's voices. And in the beginning, their voices were very closed, and it took a while to get to know them. But after a while, they really showed their loving selves, and we had just a lovely time. To me, it was a woman's piece. I feel there's a section in this solo that actually is a soul of the entire piece. It starts with people passing each other in the choreography, showing the passage of time, and then it goes into connections with men and women together, women, men together, and then it goes into a love duet, and then into a solo, which shows the trauma and the kind of the depressed, low energy that oftentimes I could sense from their personalities. And then all of a sudden, the men kind of came in and did a very powerful section, which I just showed you, and they lift up and then they lift up the women. And anyway, it's a very hopeful piece. It's hard to discuss what's in my head as a choreographer.
But it makes sense because there's something about so Kazakh culture historically, before it sort of Kazakhstan initially sort of was being taken over by the Russian Empire and then later by the Soviet Empire. Kazakhs are a nomadic people, and there was this sense, there's this kind of essence of them that is always focused on the future and hope rather than the past and whatever traumas they've had. I mean, Kazakhstan is a place that both in the Russian Empire and in the Soviet times was a huge place of exile. So actually it's a very multi-ethnic, multicultural, like 142 different kind of cultures and ethnicities and many languages, because people from all over the Soviet Union were being exiled there. And the same thing was happening in Russian imperial times too. And actually Kazakhs, resident there were always really very hospitable, very helpful to all these newcomers. They weren't resentful, even though they were also being pushed around. And so there's something of that culture that's remained, and I think that made it such a pleasure to do projects there, is that there's a way that despite the trauma and the suffering that they've had throughout the past centuries, and despite that, the post-Soviet times are a difficult, economically not straightforward time for people, unstable in many ways. They're very, there's a sense that in the end, still, they're very kind of forward-thinking, future-focused, and open, always open. And so that was really fun to watch, Rebecca working with the dancers and sort of be a conduit for that two-way communication, because I was constantly translating for them. Is how open they were to her ideas and her teaching.
And as a result, I was able to put this piece together in 6 days, which is was something that surprised me. But they were right.
And it's a 17-minute piece, Rebecca, right?
Huh?
The whole piece is 17 minutes long?
It's 17 minutes long, right?
Yeah.
So I have an excerpt here. So do you want to see it?
Let's watch a little bit of this. This is rehearsal footage, but of the sort of complete piece, at least from the studio.
For sure. So it's intense piece. This is the poster, correct, Anna, of the concert?
Of the premiere, yeah, which unfortunately we weren't able to stay around for. The premiere actually took place sometime after we left, but
Yeah, I would love to see that in performance. I've never seen it in performance. Here's some beautiful pictures of them in performance. And then afterwards, Anna, you want to talk a little bit about?
well, we just I mean, I'm mindful of the time. It's 8:10, but we did some outreach also in the we gave some talks. Rebecca spoke to some very young dance students and shared some of her sort of family's history and heritage in dance. And then we also spoke to some students of arts administration and talked about arts entrepreneurship. And Rebecca even got to go on TV on sort of for a conversation with Gulnara and this is the host on the left. So that was just a few other things that we tried to do sort of to connect with the locals.
There you go.
And that's us. So Wayne, do you want to sort of take over from here in terms of moderating the conversation and the questions?
Absolutely. Well, thank you. This was really tremendously exciting. And we'll be having, we do have links to videos of all the performances, or some of the performances at least, that we will be emailing out probably this weekend or early next week, so that if you want to look at them more, and also with Zoom, you get a little bit of staticky as we're watching it. But if you're just able to go on in your own on the web, the performances will.
Can I say something quickly about that? That I'm going to put them up for only a week, because I don't have my full pieces online generally. So you have a week to watch them.
Yeah, well, once the links go out, you'll have a week, certainly. And the thing is, yeah, you'll have the last piece, the Samrak piece, in full from the the video from the staged performance as it was premiered. You'll have, I think, Ruth's Suite, and then you'll have Andrina's Salome dance as well in full. Wayne, there was actually a question that came in on the chats, I see, for who composed the music, but Arthur, for which piece like number 1, 2, 3, or 5 of the dance pieces were you asking? The last one.
Oh,
Rebecca.
Steve Reich. It's called Three Movements, and it was done in 1986. Yeah.
And I would certainly encourage you, if there are other folks have questions, please put them into the chat. And actually, why don't we just start right there? The other piece that you had done for the Peabody Essex, that was also Steve Reich, wasn't it? Am I remembering that correctly?
For Future Creativity? I think you worked with several musical compositions by minimalist composers, right, for that?
Yes, I used Steve Reich and Andrew Parker, who's a contemporary composer and not very well known, and also Danish group that's recent.
So what is it about that particular type of music that there's something that sparks in you?
It's edgy. It's edgy. I don't know. It just makes me excited. I mean, I love it. I mean, I loved Khachaturian, and you could see the kind of lusciousness of the dance in the last movement of Ruth's Suite. I mean, I just love that. But that's traditional. It's kind of it's old-fashioned to me, and I love the new forward-thinking ways that composers are kind of arranging and thinking about creativity. I love working with contemporary artists.
Well, actually, and I'll ask one more question, then we'll turn to the audience. One of the topics that we've been exploring throughout this series of artists working with materials. And you may have noticed next month with Alyssa Hunter, our guest next month, she's explicitly going to talk about her love of materials and the evolution of how she's worked with materials over her career. But with visual artists, we're talking about the tactile and the sort of the visual materials. And what struck me about all of your work, but particularly this last collaboration with the Kazakhs, the material that you are working with were the dancers, that you're working with the human beings and also combining it with the work of other artists, the music. And I'm just very, very curious about what do you think about the dancers as materials? How do you think about them in terms of when you're choreographing?
I don't know, it's strange because I've been dancing since I was 2. So I don't know myself other than being a dancer. So, and you're wondering, why is she answering it that way? I am answering it that way because I literally fall in love with my dancers. I actually try to, I feel like every dance I do with my dancers is reflecting a portrait of them in a way, and that not so much their personalities, but their inside beings. And, I remember all my dancers. I remember all my pieces. And actually, when I do my pieces, when I choreograph them, it comes from a very deep place inside me. And then before we premiere it, I give it to my dancers because it's theirs. It's not mine anymore. They have to perform it.
Well, and I would say that Rebecca, compared to other choreographers, she doesn't quite as much treat the dancers as just like her own personal clay that like she ruthlessly molds. I think she encourages them to have more input in the creation and interpretation of the dance. I mean, yes, she's the choreographer, but in terms of how she works with improv, in terms of how she looks at how they respond to certain movements, I think she's less ruthless and sort of insisted on her own ego than some choreographers can be, if you will. So yes, they're her material, but they are a semi-autonomous material as well.
Sure.
I just maybe shall I bring into the conversation a couple sort of quick questions that I've seen come through the chat.
Yes.
Patrick was asking if Samrak, this is so wonderful to watch Samrak, and if there's any chance to come to Boston. This is a pet dream of Rebecca's and mine. We'd love to, but
we have to do a fundraiser, Anna.
yeah, well, fundraiser, and we have to wait for the our visa immigration policies to sort of like calm down. Right now, it's very, very difficult to bring artists into the country, but hopefully with some time that will settle down and we'll be able to bring them over. And then Rebecca Serena was asking if you have a preference in your creative process. Do you enjoy limits or do you enjoy freedom? And I mean, certainly in our projects together, you've usually been very limited.
Oh, I love freedom. Are you kidding? Yeah.
But in my experience, I think you sometimes you love freedom, but then you expand in all directions. So sometimes I have to put some limitations to get you back into.
Look at it this way. I worked at the Boston Ballet for 17 years, basically because I was a modern dancer who was really struggling. I was a mother. I had children. Was working as a teacher, not making much money, and I was able to go into these gorgeous studios and have incredible musicians playing for my classes and giving me the opportunity to choreograph, but I had to use ballet dancers. And if ballet dancers weren't really trained in modern, I trained them in modern so that they could do my work. So yeah, I love the freedom, but as Anna said, you need boundaries, and those boundaries help challenge you and put pressure on you. And I think you become, a piece of pottery, basically, with that fire. So, yeah, I think.
So maybe if you could get really specific on that. I know the piece that we saw from the lobby of the Peabody Essex with Marcus dancing, you were tremendously constrained by that rectangle that you had. So how did that limit force you to be more creative?
Well, it limited me. Well, actually, when I created it, I wasn't limited. I just worked with him and I got it out. Because you have to get it out from a place that's really deep. So it came out. And then, of course, I heard from Anna how big the space was, what, 20 by 15 or something? And you could see he was able to accommodate. You know, he can use space so well. He could do that. He could have done that dance in a 40 square foot studio and used probably all the space because he's so strong. And but with that strength also comes the control that he needed to have to not fall off the edge. So you
Well,
can
and
see, yeah.
I'd say there's something also again appropriate to the theme of the Fabergé exhibition, because Fabergé pieces were always, they're not large, that they're quite small, and there's like huge amount of refinement and precision in this like tiny surfaces. So in that sense, I guess that wasn't the intent. It was just the physical logistical limitations. But in a sense, it was also appropriate because it was that miniature kind of ultra precise kind of situation.
Absolutely.
So Arthur was asking if there's a folk element in this. He says in this dance, I guess he must mean the last dance. um
Mm,
I think not, yeah.
maybe just in terms of community, but
But it
no,
wasn't related to Kazakh folk traditions at all.
no.
Neither their musical traditions nor their specific ethnic movement traditions. Although in many ways, in Soviet times, the effort was made to undermine local ethnic traditions and
Mhm.
replace them with kind of a pan-Soviet culture, of which ballet was a very, very important part. So in a way, it's sort of it's not traditional at all, but they now had this kind of superimposed Russian tradition of dance that they sort of were working with.
Do we have some other questions that people in the audience would like to pose?
And I
So
think, Wayne, you were saying that people can feel free to unmute themselves to
yes,
speak, right?
yes, please do if anyone wants to hop in. I'm also curious. So that the Kazakh experience was 2011. So that's 10 years ago. How did that whole experience influence you subsequently? What did you bring back, and did it change the way you work in any way?
Hmm, that's a hard question. Um, well, it made me appreciate what I have. That's for sure. Being over here in America, I wish we had more support for dance in America and in Boston, actually. I feel like they actually have quite a lot of support for dance in Almaty and Astana in Kazakhstan. And of course, the Russia supports its dancers. So um, I don't know. It made me it opened up my mind and my eyes and helped me uh, want to have them come over basically and share with America because we need to see these people. They're quite talented, not just as a company, but as Kazakhs. They're fascinating people. Um, yeah, it did change me for sure. But it also, I think it gave me a lot of confidence that I could create something so quickly with the help of Anna and with the dancers. We did put something together that, as I look at it now, I like it. It's not something that oh my God, I have to change this, change that. We were able to actually really create it on the spot, which means that it came from a quick place. You know, sometimes when you do things and you don't think it's right because you're using your cognitive brain, but then all of a sudden you realize, wow, that was the right thing I should have done. So yeah.
Well, and the Ballet Russe, the historic company that kind of inspires us at Ballet Russe Arts Initiative, I mean, they were a touring company. They were a relatively small company, many fewer dancers than what you see in the kind of stable dance companies of today. I mean, sometimes just 20 people or sometimes even less. And often the choreographers who were creating pieces were doing just like Rebecca, like under strict time limitations. They sometimes had to perform on very small stages, so they had to adapt to that. It had to be sort of productions that could travel easily. So, so it's interesting because those restrictions, you kind of, I think the way people now think of ballet is this kind of very formalized, thing that happens with like a lot of planning and a lot of kind of structure and rigor and so on and so forth. But that wasn't always the case. And the Ballet Russe traveled around the world and they were very influential. But it was actually how a lot of their dances are being created, particularly in the late teens and early 20s, was really similar to Rebecca's experience.
That makes a whole lot of sense. And I notice Amy Archer in the chat commented, your dances go right to the heart. And it just strikes me that, again, those constraints that you faced, 6 days, you didn't know the dancers, you didn't know their traditions, you had the language barrier. You could do nothing but go straight to the essence of what you and they were trying to do, your shared artistry in dance. And
just to clarify though, Wayne, so we did have 3 weeks, and we didn't work all 3 weeks with the dancers, but Rebecca taught them for at least about a week, just taught them in some of the techniques of modern and some of her creative approach. What she meant about the 6 days was of pure choreographic work. That's the time that she spent working on that particular piece. She did already know them. She had about a week to get to know them before beginning choreography per se. But yeah, it was still a hugely compressed amount of time with a lot of limitations, of course.
But that osmosis was necessary in order to have it come out so quickly, to choreograph it so quickly. Yeah.
That is wonderful. Well, good. Well, do we have, we'll just ask one last time, anyone has any last questions that they'd like to share? You just unmute yourselves and pop in. See if we have anyone. Well, we've got lots of adoring comments, which I encourage people to.
I read them. I wonder if I can have a copy of them.
Yes, we'll save a copy of the comments.
I don't know if you can even do that, but thank you.
No, it's possible to do. Erica was asking, was actually saying that our dynamic, our collaborative dynamic, is very positive, and she was interested to know what our projects are going forward. Ballet Russe Arts Initiative has a new space that we've started to work with that's very interesting, and that I've been trying to get Rebecca to come visit, and unfortunately she wasn't able to do it before the pandemic started, and then of course all hell broke loose. But we now have our Steinway piano is placed on the 4th floor of Faneuil Hall in the Museum of the Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company, which is a very historic organization founded in 1638. But their space above the Great Hall, which is on levels 2 and 3, is a very interesting place. The museum's sort of arrayed around the perimeter, but the interior, it's a very large room, capacity for 500 if it's just set up with seating. But what I imagine is there's these kind of bench seats which can be set up for concerts or performances. So I imagine putting those benches around the perimeter of the room and having sort of dance almost in the round or in the square in the middle of it could be really interesting there. And we have a piano there, and we can potentially even bring chamber musicians like a cellist, and Rebecca's choreographed for sort of a piece featuring cello. So hopefully when things kind of calm down with the pandemic to the point when we can have people in the space, and in fact at least begin to have Rebecca and dancers in the space, we can begin to develop, I think, a creative concept. But I think it would be a really fun, interesting place to do to have dance performances. We're already doing some concert performances there, obviously for now just virtual concerts. In fact, we have one coming up on the 28th of February, but eventually I think it's going to be a really interesting place to present dance, because there's really the space and the ceiling height in the air there to do dance. So that's I think, Rebecca, that's like my number one, I think, sort of in the pipeline idea. But what are you thinking?
Oh, I'd like to get Samric out here. I'd like to work on that. I also am working on a legacy project of my grandmother. I have lots of costumes and notes and dances from the era that I danced with her and with my aunt and my sister and my family. So I'm kind of archiving some of that work and also archiving my dances. I've done almost 100 actually. But what happens with choreographers, we make them and then we go into the next project, right? We never are sitting down and long enough to actually uh, put them down. And I videoed most of them and have had professional videos of them. So I'm trying to organize, and I probably all of us are doing that to some degree during this pandemic, right? Taking a little time to put our lives back grounded, ground ourselves. So I'm looking forward to working with Anna in the future and doing some more choreography, definitely.
Well, and the other thing is that actually I think would be fun to do is maybe sometime before we can get people inside into a space, maybe do something outdoors too. That would be interesting.
Fascinating.
Great. Well, on that, let me thank you both, Anna Winestein and Rebecca Rice. This was just a wonderful, wonderful evening. A great, frankly, a diversion for me personally and for many in our audience. It's part of what art does for us. It refreshes the soul, and being able to see your wonderful work and how it has touched so many people all around the world really is very inspiring to all of us. I thank everyone for tuning in. We will, as I said, we'll be back to you in a couple of days with an email with the links to more videos. We certainly do welcome you back. We're here third Thursday of every month. Next month, we'll have Lissa Hunter talking about speaking through making, finding voice. She'll be, as I mentioned earlier, she'll be talking about how her use of materials and how she looks at objects and materials has evolved over the years and how she has found her own distinctive voice through doing that. So I certainly hope that everyone will join us in another month, as well as stopping by our new gallery. We've got our first outside show. Right now, it's the local high school students who do really remarkable work, and I do hope that you'll come in and help support them just by stopping by. Thank you, everyone. I certainly encourage, as you're welcome to log off if you want, or our practice here is to treat this kind of like the end of theater. And if people want to mill around in the lobby and chat and say hello to people who they maybe haven't seen in a while during this pandemic, we leave the line open for another 10-15 minutes just so that people can mingle if you'd like. Thank you and good night, everyone.